Now, the panel will clearly deal with security issues, with defense, and I would like us to mostly focus on two of the biggest conflict that the West faces in the East and in the Middle East. So the conflict in Ukraine and the one happening in Syria and in Iraq around well, Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL, however we want to call it. And I will start with Dr. Farkas and ask her to also answer in her presentation some questions regarding the recent decisions taken at the NATO summit in Wales. Are the decisions taken there enough, let's say, to reassure NATO members, especially the ones in Central Eastern Europe who are, well, for good reasons, sensitive towards the evolutions here? And what else could be done, let's say, to confront this serious crisis we see in the East? Dr. Farkas, you have the floor.
So thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, first of all, to the organizers, first of all, to the Aspen Institute in Romania, to Ambassador Joanna for his leadership in organizing this security summit. I think it's a very good opportunity for us to take pause and to look at some of the issues that Paul just mentioned, and of course the economic issues which our colleagues discussed in depth, I believe, this afternoon. Thank you also to the German Marshall Fund, to Karen Donfried, and to Alina Inaya, who is leading the effort here in Bucharest, and to everybody else for their participation, including the whole staff working here and the volunteers who have been kind enough to actually even take me shopping when my luggage was lost. So I'm very grateful for that. Anna Maria gets her plug. She was the personal shopper. But I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk to the group here and to the audience about U.S. policy in light of the Ukraine crisis. So that's kind of the way that I want to frame my remarks, and then I'll get to your question as I make my way through my remarks. I'll try to be brief so that we have time for questions, because I think that's obviously of greater interest to most of the audience as well as my colleagues, and maybe we can have a little bit of an exchange. So first of all, obviously, if we look at the current situation vis-a-vis Ukraine, right now, we, the United States, are encouraged by the fact that we have the Minsk agreements of the 5th and the 19th of September. We believe it's an important step towards a sustainable, mutually agreed upon ceasefire. However, we remain concerned. We've seen that the Russians have not immediately met all of the commitments that they are required to meet under the Minsk agreement, including withdrawal of all forces, weapons, and equipment from Ukraine, securing and respecting the international borders between the two countries with OSCE monitors, and ensuring that all hostages are released. So it's an ongoing situation, and as I mentioned, we're watching very carefully. We, on the other hand, commend Ukraine's efforts towards implementing its responsibilities under the Minsk agreement, which include passing legislation on amnesty, as well as the special status for parts of eastern Ukraine. But Russia's unlawful intervention, its military intervention, and its asymmetric operations in Ukraine, as we all know, are really challenging the vision of the Europe whole, free, and at peace. And this is what I hope we can talk about a little bit today. The U.S. response to this crisis, which we call the Ukraine crisis, but in effect it's a crisis that we're facing. We've seen similar crises before in the region. We are pursuing this today at this juncture with 3 courses of action. The first is demonstrating support to Ukraine's government. The second is reassuring our allies, the one that you mentioned, Paul, as well as our partners, so the non-NATO allies. And then third, imposing costs on Russia for its illegal activity. And the Department of Defense has an important role in all 3 areas, and I'll just go through them quickly. First of all, the Wales Summit, we believe, was really a testament to the strength of the alliance. We saw all 28 members come together and affirm their support for Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and integrity, and that was obviously very important. We also backed it up, we together as members of the alliance, backed up that strong assertion with our verbal and then material support to Ukraine. So all of the allies together in Wales also committed to provide assistance to the Ukrainian government. And that assistance would include military assistance and building Ukraine's defense institutions. The United States, of course, has been working to address Kiev's requests for defense materials and supplies since March of this year, and we have committed so far, and I say so far because it's an ongoing process, $100 million in support to Ukraine, and this has provided funding for basic soldier equipment, medical supplies, communications gear, night vision, and then support to monitor and secure their very porous border with Russia. In addition, we have a much more intensive ongoing senior level dialogue with the Ukrainians about institution building and reform of their military so that we can help them build a strong, modern military in the medium and long term. So as for the reassurance part, again, as I mentioned, in Wales, we reaffirmed our commitment to Article 5 and our commitment to reassure our NATO members who are in the eastern part of NATO, who obviously feel more threatened by Russia's activities than those in the west. And how did we do that? We continued the increased air patrols over the Baltics, rotations of additional forces through Eastern Europe for training and exercises, and the naval presence through the Black Sea, which of course Romania was part of. In fact, I'm happy to say our Secretary of Defense was here recently visiting your port in Constanța. The NATO also approved a new readiness action plan, and essentially what that is asserting that we will continue all of this increased activity throughout the rest of the year and there into the future. And that is a serious commitment. In addition to that, we are updating defense planning, and NATO is also creating a new highly ready rapid response force, which can be deployed on very short notice. And this obviously is key for some of our Eastern allies in terms of reassuring them. So NATO's presence in Central and Eastern Europe will increase with these additional training exercises, troop rotations, equipment that we will place in the Central and Eastern Europe area. And the United States is contributing directly to this effort through the $1 billion that our president has requested for the so-called European Reassurance Initiative. We're waiting for our Congress to approve that, and hopefully they will. And some portion of that funding, I should mention, will also go to help reassure our partners who are not NATO members, but also require some help beefing up their deterrence so that they feel also more secure vis-a-vis the threat from Russia. Along those lines, the United States bilaterally not only is going to be providing material assistance to the non-NATO partners, but we have beefed up our strategic dialogue with several of the countries concerned. For Moldova, we just launched a strategic dialogue this year, which is a framework to expand our bilateral security discussions. So that's something we're doing, Department of Defense and State Department, with our Moldovan colleagues. And we have expanded, just in the last year, our cooperative threat reduction program with Moldova, which helps them with border security. We're also working with our Georgian partners, who I'm happy to report are in the audience. We have had now for many years a long-standing bilateral strategic cooperation agreement with Georgia, and we have been working to increase our activities with Georgia and also in concert with NATO to provide Georgia with a whole host of expanded opportunities. Georgia is a very strong partner in the NATO context, but also in the bilateral US context. So, and then of course we have reaffirmed the open door, which I think is also important in terms of managing the Ukraine crisis. Finally, the last part of the US approach to the crisis is imposing costs on Russia and reassessing the relationship with Russia. So right out of the gates in March of this year, we froze our bilateral military relationship with Russia, given their activity, given their incursion into Crimea and their activities in the east. And of course, NATO has done the same thing. We then, of course, embarked upon a series of sanctions together with our European colleagues and allies. And we have been very clear that Russia has acted in violation of international law, in violation of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. Possibly they appear to be in violation of the Geneva Convention and Conventional Arms Control Agreement. So all of these are outstanding issues we are raising with the Russians, and clearly diplomatically they are being pressured, and economically as well. I think I don't need to say much more on this, except that in addition to the short-term actions that we're taking to make sure that there is a price for Russia to pay, we are also reassessing our relationship with Russia, in as much as previously we had all more or less agreed that there was no immediate threat from the east, that NATO itself and the United States, in as much as we are concerned about European stability, did not have to plan for a potential threat from the east. So we are not, of course, now we are no longer in the business as usual mode, and so we are reviewing exactly what Russia's actions, what kind of implications Russia's actions have for us in the Department of Defense. I think really the way I want to conclude is we as a group, so within NATO and outside of NATO, the democratic states who are outraged by Russian military activities, we need to come up with a better and enduring means for deterring such activities. We need to assess and strengthen our military and economic relationships, and I think we've had some discussion about the economic side, so this panel can talk about the security component. We need to be more active inside of NATO, reassuring our Eastern allies, but also outside of NATO militarily. And I think there's much more for us to do, but we can also we can take some pride in what we have done so far, and I can speak more about that later. But I think there is cause for us to be at least somewhat proud of how far we've come together, Europe and the United States, in responding to this threat, but there is more to do.